This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Raise the rudder! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be joined by David M. Stewart, who is the author of a new biography, There's No Going Back, the life and work of Jonathan Demme. Jonathan Demme is one of my favourite film directors. I think he's one of those film directors who I sort of first became aware of as a contemporary to myself as I was growing up, watching Stop Making Sense and Melvin and Howard and then Something Wild. And so it was kind of strange when he then made Silence of the Lambs and sort of became famous as a film director to a more general public, because I felt I sort of discovered him before anyone else. That was the first time that had happened to me, so I was very pleased. So it was wonderful reading this biography, David. Thank you so much for writing it.
Thank you so much, John. It really means a lot that you enjoyed the book, and thanks for having me on your show. I'm a huge fan.
And we've just been talking off mic about the Paul Thomas Anderson film that's just out, One Battle After Another, which you saw last night, right?
Oh yeah, saw it in 70mm at the Somerville Theater in Somerville, Massachusetts, and man, I'm still trying to make sure my feet are planted on the ground after seeing that movie. It's I think your audiences will really get a kick out of it. And in many ways, Paul Thomas Anderson, his career would not have been possible had it not been for the life and work of Jonathan Demme and his influence. So there'll be a lot of Demme references in this upcoming movie. And yeah, I mean, it was such a trip, and it's like a roller coaster. I can't wait to go back and see it again in various different formats. I think I saw it in 70mm. I think I'll definitely check it out in VistaVision in a few weeks. Yeah,
this is the first time I think I've been excited about a movie for a while, in terms of really sort of the anticipation is growing, and I'm hearing a lot of good things coming out of it. So I'm so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I can only go on and on about the movie, but obviously I wouldn't want to spoil your audiences, or indeed Warner Brothers coming in to impact this broadcast. But yeah, I mean, there's something about Anderson's films and his style that really almost is in sync with Jonathan Demme's style in terms of really showcasing the humanity of repressed individuals or those living in an oppressed society. And yeah, I mean, if you look back at the catalog of films that he made, I mean, going back to Caged Heat in 1974, I mean, as schlocky and exploitational as that film style was at the time, it still holds up today. I mean, it especially in the issues of women's agency and, trying to fight an oppressive male-dominant society. And I think there's just something about those movies that click with me that I wanted to try to figure out who the heck was this bright-eyed, smiling director who had these amazing women and characters and stories in his mind.
Yeah, that's such an interesting idea as well. That in many ways the image of Jonathan Demme as a director is a little bit opposed to sort of the sort of gruff, bad-tempered tyrant on the set. Cracking his sort of horsewhip against his boots and shouting cut through a megaphone. He seems to have a much more genial public persona.
Absolutely. And I think I'll give you one example. My good friend Glenn Kenny wrote this amazing book on Scarface last year. And he interviewed Michelle Pfeiffer, and Pfeiffer explained how Brian De Palma more or less tried to tell her to tone down the humanistic aspects of her role as Elvira Hancock into a coked up, jaded, icy ingenue. Whereas in Married to the Mob, Jonathan, I always think of that movie as a spiritual sequel to Scarface, particularly for Elvira Hancock and Angela DeMarco, because I just think, like, with Jonathan, he really cherished, the agency of women, as I mentioned before, and for having Michelle Pfeiffer taking the chance to really embrace this loving single mother role that eventually would catapult her, her choices in the roles that she played later on in the 90s and the roles she worked on as a producer. It really says a lot about how Jonathan really embraced and was excited about an actor getting it right on either first take or second take, and not just relying on improvisation, not relying on rehearsal, because Jonathan hated rehearsal. He wanted to capture the spontaneity of the moments. And I think when it came to really showcasing these incredible characters and these women, whether it be Melanie Griffith, Jodie Foster, Mary Steenburgen, Anne Hathaway, and Oprah Winfrey, Kimberly Elsie, I could go on and on, Thandaway Newton. He was just so, he was smitten with just projecting a woman's presence on film and having them lead the narrative. And I think that's just something I really stuck onto when I was getting my notebook during lockdown and writing up every movie I found on John, or I was made by Jonathan, to really find some sort of through line.
Let me just ask you about your origin story prior to writing this book.
Well, I grew up in Hyannis, Massachusetts, and I was a middle child to two other brothers, and my parents always had this love and appreciation for the arts. And I think every weekend we were going to the movies or we were listening to my dad's CDs of Harvest by Neil Young and The Who's Next. And that just, through that osmosis, I just really fell in love with just the whole artistic endeavor that capturing it and explaining it through writing was something I tried to excel at through school. And then when I was in high school, I was given the chance to not only write for my high school newspaper, but also write for a local publication down in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, called the Barnesville Patriot. So for a whopping $40 an article, I would just have that be my proverbial ticket to building on my portfolio over the next few years, whether it be through writing for various college newspapers or eventually finding my way to writing for small column-sized reviews for the Chicago Reader, and eventually writing for Please Kill Me during lockdown, which was Leg McNeil and Julian McCain's webzine inspired by their book on the oral history of punk rock, which was very influential when I read the book, and also substantial when I was writing my book, because originally I wanted to write an oral history of Jonathan's life in the same vein as, say, the Gene Stein, George Plimpton book on Edie Sedgwick. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much I had to contextualize in order to make the quotes stick out. Those pull quotes really stand. But through working with these various publications, including also Airmail Weekly, Graydon Carter and Alexander Stanley's 2019 online weekly, it just really helped catapult my interest in writing a book about Jonathan. I think I did it for the sake of, because his films always had such a indelible impression on me when I was at a young age.
What was the first film that you saw of his?
I saw Philadelphia when I was 14.
Right.
And granted, it wasn't the film that was widely received by all reviewers upon its initial release. I know some critics still have difficulties with it today, but for me as a 14-year-old naive kid whose film scholarship has been only limited to, say, watching Train Spotting or A Clockwork Orange, I was still trying to dive deep into those real rabbit holes. But when I saw Philadelphia, those first opening shots, I didn't see Denzel Washington or Tom Hanks. I saw Joe Miller and Andrew Beckett, the characters they played. And there was something about the believability of Demme's camera, Tak Fujimoto's camera work as well, giving the indication that you're in the comfort of these characters the next 2 hours or so. And you're almost in the point where you want to extend your hand and shake them. Say hi, nice to meet you. I think it was just the extended takes that I would watch over and over again of the movie, the use of music, it really did solidify, aspects of what I loved about Jonathan's movies. And there's something about that movie in particular that I rushed home to my parents' word processor and tried to write a high school play version that never got beyond the computer. There was something very emotive and substantial about the importance of allyship in a very divisive world, and what Denzel Washington's character does to make sure that he aligns with Tom Hanks' character. It's very moving. I thought really embodied the values that I felt were close to America in terms of people from various backgrounds or proclivities finding a sense of unity in terms of fighting an injustice in society, whether it be work discrimination or sexual discrimination or homophobia and the isms that have since plagued society and have since shifted over into various other iterations. And then I saw Silence of the Lambs a year later, and then that just was like the hook, line, and sinker for me. And then following that, I was watching The Manchurian Candidate after reading some Rolling Stone ad noting that everything was under control. I remember seeing the press ad and then just looking over my shoulder while I was traveling with my folks and seeing these tanks roll up to Boston, and it happened to be the Democratic National Convention in 2004. So the timing was just so prescient, to say the least, that no matter where I was, Jonathan's films ended up in my purview one way or another. And when he died in 2017, it just left such a gaping hole for me personally, as well as for so many others who were moved by his movies or worked with him, that I just started going back and watching his films and try to find where was that beating heart that really captured the energy and celebration of life, which I feel like all his movies have that same theme more way. One way or another.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there's that openness, there's that sort of sense of openness which is never credulous. It's I'll take. I mean, I think that almost is seen in his Howard Hughes film, where there's a sense of you don't know if you're going to believe this is Melvin and Howard. The film itself really suspends disbelief on whether Melvin is telling the truth or not, and it's almost like that doesn't matter really, because this moment is too beautiful for us to dismiss.
Absolutely. I mean, the first 20 minutes of the movie, the audience is left in total disbelief over what the focus of the film is going to be and what journey you're going to take. I mean, the extended shot of Paul and Matt driving up in that truck and find Jason Robards moaning in the desert and bring him back. It's a very chilling scene. And if you had no idea of what was going on or any inclination of the movie itself, you might think it's like a precursor to Silence of the Lambs. And then when I talked to Mike Medavoy, who is the head of Orion Pictures and suggested Jonathan direct the movie Silence of the Lambs, he noted that there were elements of Melvin Howard that he saw that were very suspenseful, that he wanted to see emulated in Silence of the Lambs. And you definitely get that with the opening shot of Paul and Matt driving down the road, and you have the radio going on to Phil Oakes and the crazy horse, and then you see that again replicated in Silence of the Lambs when Brooke Smith is playing American Girl and singing before she is in Buffalo Bill's point of view.
Absolutely, yeah. That's such an interesting connection. And that it's so funny about Jonathan Demme. He is one of those filmmakers who seems to go from one genre to another quite easily, that you can sometimes miss the connective tissue that, no, actually there's, he's doing stuff here that is quite consistent, even though he's very varied. It's a sort of paradox in his work.
That's true. And even though I think Paul Thomas Anderson said in one interview that although his movies are totally different, they are almost exactly the same. I know it sounds like a line from one of the Talking Heads songs, like Heaven, but that's just how I saw Jonathan's films. And the fact that a good colleague of mine, Ty Burr, he said to another friend of mine, Sean Burns, both Boston film critics, there are no extras in Jonathan's movies. And you definitely sense that based on the tenets that Roger Corman instilled in Jonathan when he was a young publicist and wanted to become a filmmaker. And he noted that the eyeball is the most important muscle in the body, and that it helps stimulates whatever stimuli is presented into the brain. And whatever the camera just is a microcosm of the human brain, and you are just whatever the eye line goes to one person, the camera's on them, and then you have characters as varied as Charles Napier, Tracy Walter, Paul Lazar, Sister Carol East, Bill Irwin, all flowing in and out of Jonathan's movies because, he loved actors, he loved them as friends, and he really wanted to showcase just the depth and scope of a very dedicated crew. And I think also goes back to like when he worked with Roger Corman, and there was that pretense of if you weren't holding lights, if you weren't running wires, or if you weren't having a boom mic in your hand, you threw on some clothes and you were one of the extras in a scene. So that was just his whole take. Even Sebastian Stan in a film like Rachel Getting Married, you see him twice. First in the beginning when he's berating Anne Hathaway, and then you see him again as one of the wedding guests in the third act of the movie. And that was just Jonathan's love of actors, and just no matter what frame they're in or where they showed up later on in the movie, he just managed to showcase their talents and really make sure they had their day in the sun. And same thing with all the filmmakers that inspired him as well, and like the stylistic approaches he and Tak Fujimoto ensured in making sure an extensive take worked. And that went on just the basis of his first meeting with Bernardo Bertolucci, which led to a lifelong friendship. When Bertolucci asked him, "Are you going to do an extended takes in your first movie?" And Jonathan said to himself, "Oh, wow, I didn't think of that. I'm putting production day money on one extended shot." And then he managed to do it in Caged Heat with the women mulling around the prison, outside the prison, and then just it almost a shot like the Spire Stratagem, where you have the camera going back and forth.
The opening shot, isn't it? I think of Cage Heat.
Yeah. I mean, after the gunfight that you have with that amazing cameo by Gary Getzman, then there's the sequence where the women are off the bus, and then some of the inmates are cracking jokes, and then you see Tak Fujimoto's name in the credits, listed as cinematographer, and that is like the first instance of the extended take style or approach that Jonathan would utilize throughout most of his movies. I mean, before he went to the whole dogma stage with Rachel Getting Married in 2007, 2008.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about his background with Roger Corman and Caged Heat. This coming in the context of sort of, I watched Foxy Brown the other night for the first time as well. It's blaxploitation movie. Yeah. Oh my God, I've got a black belt in bar stools. That was my favorite line. It's a gay bar fight. It was so funny and so much fun. But it also sort of is that thing of let's use real sort of grindhouse genre movie making for our own political ends, and kind of it's entertaining and it's lively and all the rest of it, but it's also doing something really sort of interesting from a political point of view. And Jonathan's course is doing that with Caged Heat, which is basically a sort of women in prison movie, ripe for exploitation and shower scenes. And then, he sort of uses it in a much more interesting way.
Absolutely. I mean, when I talked to Erica Gavin, who starred in the movie as Jacqueline Wilson, she's a very sweet woman. She was very frank when she told me that the difference between Jonathan working with her and compared to, say, the director Russ Myers, whom she worked with before and was a star of all these major sexploitation films like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls or Vixen. She said about Jonathan, whereas Russ Myers, in her words, was a TNA kind of guy, whereas Jonathan didn't care about that. He wanted to see what was in your soul. That's what he cared about. And I think the exploitational aspects of, say, the nudity, that was par for the course when working with New World Pictures in the early 70s, when Roger Corman would, have notes on the sides, margins, like, possible nudity question mark in between certain scenes. But I think, the eroticism that tries to allure the male demographic into the theater, it's shut down when you have that amazing suspenseful John Cale viola score in the background while they're just fighting in the shower. Juanita Brown and Erica Gavin, and just the ferocious handheld by Tak Fujimoto. I mean, with Roger Corman, he told Jonathan that there was a three-pronged structure to making exploitation films. They sell on sex, violence, and social commentary. And for Jonathan, rather than divvying it up to 33 and a third % for each of those approaches to filmmaking, later on in his career, he wanted to really shift the numbers to make it 95% social commentary and probably 2.5% sex and violence thrown in a bit. I mean, you could say even Married to the Mob is a loving ode to the New World Pictures films of the early 70s, but with that humor that is quintessentially Demme-esque in terms of pointing out the flaws of the FBI, and how they're no less different than the criminals. Just that line by Trey Wilson where he says, yeah, the mob are a bunch of corrupt thieves and criminals. We work for the President of the United States of America. So,
I mean,
what a time to be alive and hear those movies.
Exactly. I often think of that in terms of cultural moments of sort of like, wouldn't it be great to have been alive when Sergeant Pepper's was released? And wouldn't it be?
Oh, absolutely.
So whenever there's a something of cultural importance happening today, it's important to be grateful, because in decades to come, some people will look back and go, "You were there when X was making movies. You actually saw that at the cinema." And there are some names around who are creating those moments. So we should. Well, Paul Thomas Anderson I would definitely put in that category.
Oh yeah, him, Ryan Coogler. You definitely say the same for, say, the Safdie brothers in their respective projects. They really try to capture like what is in the zeitgeist, while at the same time not trying to deviate from their creative intentions or their initial conceits. And I think for Jonathan, that was something that he really tried to gain a firm hold on, even in his early days as a fledgling filmmaker. When you think of a movie like Crazy Mama or Fighting Mad, they still are rooted in that the elements of what Jonathan saw as an engaging movie, which are women on the run or small town society trying to fight against an oppressive land development magnate. It just it really hit home to those elements of the appreciation of women, that, and as well as the environment, which honestly I think, from based on my research, really stems back from his parents and from what his father wrote about in various newspapers and magazines in the late 30s and 40s. Which, when I found that research, that was a gold mine. That was like stumbling upon Daniel Plainview's Derek and There'll Be Blood. That just that wellspring of information just really solidified where Jonathan came from, and also his approach to storytelling as well.
Sort of liberal activist background.
Yeah, liberal activist, quasi-bohemian. His father was always traveling, if not for his work in accounting, then definitely for his work at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, which was happenstance for Jonathan's sake when he met Joseph Levine, the infamous producer, impresario. And he told Jonathan, yes, Jonathan, wow, you really liked Zulu, didn't you, kid? How would you like to work in my New York office at Embassy Avco? And Jonathan took the apprenticeship with open arms.
Yeah, and another person who was really influential in his sort of first his sort of first years working in London and then as a director was the woman who would, I think he married her, wasn't her first wife, right?
Yes, Evelyn Purcell.
Yeah, exactly. And she was very influential by working with him on the film and on the films. And that was the one bit where I think you mentioned him deciding, I don't want you to work on my next film. That felt like, that's a darkness that has hitherto been unsuspected.
Yeah, I was surprised too, because when I first talked to Evelyn, she's very sweet, and she's a very dedicated filmmaker in her own right, and she was very open to talk about her time with Jonathan from 1968 to the late 70s. When that moment came, like you're alluding to, Citizens Band, which was Jonathan's first attempt to work with the studios when Paramount Pictures wanted him to make this movie based on Paul Brickman's Village Voice reportage of the CB radio craze of the late 70s. And Evelyn initially was going to be set as a producer for the film, but Jonathan thought she didn't want her to be on the set. And I asked her, and I think in the most I don't know if it was a cordial way, but I think in Jonathan's mind, he thought, it's so difficult for you to be on set with me because you see how much I work on set and at a breakneck pace. Whereas, I should also clarify that New World Pictures, they had that intense 3-week schedule of you shoot a movie for like 3 weeks, and then the film is going to be coming out a few months later if the edit survives going to the drive-in theaters. And for Evelyn, it was a setback because she wanted to make movies too. And I think there was a case of the house was too big for two directors to reside in. And when it came to working on Citizens Band, it wasn't a great experience for Jonathan because it was intimidating with, Paramount Pictures really trying to get a substantial and saleable story out to the public. And at the same time, his relationship with Evelyn was crumbling at the seams. And I think it was just because he wanted to gain that creative control. He wanted to ensure that his vision was focused. And I think at the same time, he wanted to try to separate work from home.
Yeah.
But ironically, he was with, and for if not Evelyn Purcell, then Sandy McLeod, both women who were excelled in their work in film in one way or another, be it independent film or studio work. And I think just with Jonathan, as much as he loved being around fellow artists, I think there was that breaking point when, if he was in the room with someone also with the aspirations to direct, who he also had a relationship with, then it just really caused a bit of a tension of separating church from state, if you will.
Yeah, that's the feeling I got as well, and I thought it's kind of interesting because later on in the book there's a whole, it becomes very evident that he is the sort of director who asks for ideas and is willing to listen to other people's arguments and go back and forth with people. But that's also a sort of there's an element to that which you have to always have the idea of a castling vote. You always have to have the idea that when it comes down to the final say, it's going to be his and his alone. So that sort of conflict, you would say, well, that might compromise. When is this argument going to stop? It's not going to stop when I go home. If we're going to continue discussing it. So yeah, I can sort of see a rationale behind that, but I can also see it from the other side of okay, now you're getting some success. You want to leave me by the wayside, or you want me to go back into the kitchen, or you want to go off and not bring me along with you.
And I think also Jonathan, as much as I characterize and how he's characterized in the book as a humanitarian, and he was, and will remain ennobled as such. It wasn't a position or a definition that he received overnight. It was something that sort of built through osmosis. It built through experiences. He talked about filmmaking one time as conducting your education in public, and I think when it came to every project that he came upon, he saw himself as an independent filmmaker working within the confines of the studio or within a budget that is exuberant beyond what he worked on with Roger Corman's movies. But beyond that, I think he just tried to, I think it was through over time and just examining the faults of his own. And also just, I think from what I could just try to gather a little bit from my own research was, I think there are elements of Jonathan's father that, he was trying to wrestle against in terms of trying to maintain a pseudo family environment, but at the same time, not really acknowledging the agency of, his wife, or in the case of Jonathan's mother, Dodie, who he loved and worshipped. It was somewhat ironic that Jonathan, was in the position in his, early 30s, as a husband, trying to straddle that, those definitions of who he was, as a filmmaker or as a husband, and just trying to make sure, he could not spread himself too thin in both those areas. And as a full a red-blooded man in his 30s, he had some time to experience and get a sense of what was important in his life. And it wasn't until when he was in his 40s and then he got the chance to go to Haiti and seeing these families gather together and the most difficult of economic and political circumstances, it really humbled him to the point where he felt like there was something of beyond filmmaking. Fatherhood was also an element aspect that he was destined for in his life.
So we've got a point where he's made his name in exploitation films, and Caged Heat was a hit. So these films were successful, to some degree, put his name on the map, and then he translates that into studio work, in which case he has a much more rocky relationship, at least at the beginning. And I found one of the ironies of the book. I mean, one of my favorite Jonathan Demme films is Stop Making Sense. I think it is
right.
at the pinnacle of concert movies. I did that Sight and Sound top 10 a year or so back,
Yes, yes.
and I was kicking myself that I hadn't put it on there because I don't know of another film which is so incontestably number one in its genre that I can't even really think of a number two. I mean, Stop Making Sense is the number one, and then what the Martin Scorsese film about the band,
Yeah, The
maybe The
Last
Last
Waltz.
Waltz, that could be number two, but it's way down. It's not a contest as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, what I say is like, The Last Waltz is like a funeral service for the Woodstock generation, and that's trying to like, survive the throes of the 70s and the decadence that came about. Whereas the 80s and Stop Making Sense, I think, is a celebration of the expansive nature of music and live performance. Although irony of ironies is it was the last live performances the Talking Heads would give before they reunited in 2002 at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But both movies, like I think, like the I'd say the melancholy of The Last Waltz is eclipsed by the high-paced energy of Stop Making Sense, because as Pauline Kael noted, like it's almost like going to the gym for 90 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. And I saw it in Amsterdam recently, and they pulled out all the seats of the cinema so that
Oh,
people would
wow.
dance. So that they basically had dancing versions of screenings of Stop Making Sense, which is like the perfect way of seeing it. And
Absolutely.
I'll tell you something else. I saw it for the very first time, sat with my dad, and I think this is the difference between The Last Waltz and Stop Making Sense, and its absolute sort of defining factor for me and what makes one film better than the other, is that for The Last Waltz, you really need the context. You need somebody. If you showed that to someone today, you'd have to explain to them who these people were, why they're important, why the interviews are important, in order to fully appreciate the film. I'm not saying you wouldn't get something out of it anyway, but to fully appreciate it, you need to know the context. Stop Making Sense. I watched that with my dad. Neither of us knew who Talking Heads were. We recognized one song, which was in the Lifetime one. I always forget.
Oh yeah,
the
Life During
title.
Wartime.
No. Once Upon a Lifetime.
Oh, Once in a Lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah. So I recognized that song and no others, because Talking Heads weren't huge in England at in the 80s. They were a new wave sort of cult band rather than a number one pop band at the
Well, to be
time.
fair, the UK had like the money's worth of amazing bands in the late 70s
yeah,
and early 80s.
oh my God,
and America
yeah.
was trying to catch up with it.
Oh yeah, my God, even the crap bands in the 80s were good bands.
For sure.
It was
For
like
sure.
even like the one-hit wonders, Zig Zig Sputnik and what have
Right,
you.
right.
We're just like, these are really good. These are
Like Bucks Fizz. Yeah.
exactly. And but I watched it with my dad, generational difference and all the rest of it, and we loved it. And we were just like, wow, it tells a story. The songs are amazing. The performances are amazing. And, there was no sense of, I have to find out who these guys are, and became a lifelong Talking Heads fan, lifelong
Right.
Jonathan Demme fan. Watching The Last Waltz did not have that effect on me. And again, I mean, this is subjective and blah, 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 but also it's objectively true that I'm right, and Stop Making Sense is the best concert film ever.
I'll tell you one story, John. There's an amazing anecdote of Jonathan and the Talking Heads going to Italy to premiere Stop Making Sense, and Bernardo Bertolucci is in the audience, and he's seeing everyone in the whole theater dancing. You'd think it was like Knights of Cabria or Julia of the Spirits. And Bertolucci turns to Jonathan and the band and says, I wish my films could make people dance like that.
Yes.
And Jonathan just had that sly grin, because he was someone who answered his question. You don't have any long takes. Said, well, some people can.
Yeah.
So that helped the competition and love for each other's movies really expanded. I mean, I think the same way like Brian De Palma, George Lucas, Scorsese, and Coppola would all sit down and watch rough cuts of their movies. There was that case of Jonathan Demme sitting down with like Bertolucci and seeing cuts of like La Luna or Melvin and Howard, and giving feedback of, okay, what works, what doesn't work, does this drag, does this deserve a place on the cutting room floor, or does it need more emphasis? So yeah, I mean, just as an aside, like, just that international love of filmmakers that Jonathan had, as well as the anything outside of America he really appreciated and grabbed a camera and shot. I mean, whether it be Life in Haiti or whether it be Enzo Vitabile's musical Life, about life of his journeys around Naples. It's just Jonathan was very ceaseless in his pursuit of capturing all these eclectic musicians and storytellers. Without, like, I didn't know who Robin Hitchcock was until I saw Storefront Hitchcock, and then I went back and listened to, like, the Soft Boys and all this incredible, yeah. And then just Memoir came out last year. I thought it was so beautiful, and he was very sweet to write to me while he was on the road, reminding me of just how he loved working with Jonathan on Storefront Hitchcock.
Yeah, I remember seeing Rachel Gets Married in Venice at the film festival, and sort of being jolted by, oh, Robin Hitchcock's there. Of course he's there. If he's going to turn up in any film, it's going to be a Jonathan Demme film.
Absolutely, him, Five Freddy. It's the Deluge. Even Jonathan's son Brooklyn. You see him playing guitar during the wedding ceremony. Yeah, that's Jonathan, and even his dogs, like, appear in the movie. That's just how much Jonathan really tried to create a home movie environment, even the later years of his life, and really make sure that was impactful and not feeling like it was confined to the studio. I think that was one of the time when he can actually feel comfortable to let home life and film, sort of flow in and out of one another.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned in the book as well that he becomes this collector of folk art from Haiti and from various places that he travels to, and in a sense that his films are a sort of cinematic equivalent of that. That there's something. I mean, folksy can have a negative connotation. I don't want to use it, but it does have that sort of feel of sort of being made by a family almost, having a sort of handmade feel to it.
Absolutely, and as an aside, like, Jim Jarmusch, after Jonathan passed, Jarmusch tweeted online that he missed Jonathan in his stories of ornithology. And that that little fact blew my mind, that I stuck with for the next few years when I went online and found old pages from, like, the American Ornithology Society noting Jonathan's membership, his address where he lived in Long Island as a kid. And I just thought, like, yeah, like, that's what Jonathan was. He was a cultural magpie. He just sort of swept down from his various nests, whether it be Clinica Aesthetico in Times Square or his home in Nyack, and just would collect all these sounds and images, stories that he tried to cobble together with these this amazing team of collaborators. And you see that with Ed Saxon, Kenneth Utt, Ron Bozeman, Gary Getzman, who would more or less make up Jonathan's dream team at Clinica Aesthetico in the late '80s. And I think just Jonathan, like, had just that instinctual nature of needing to record almost anything around him and everything. I mean, David Edelstein mentioned that he was almost like a folks filmmaker in a way, almost like the Johnny Appleseed or Pied Piper of Hamlin with a camera.
I mean, did Jarmusch work with Jonathan at any point?
No, but I think in the early '80s they ran the same circles, because Jonathan's then girlfriend Sandy McLeod, she starred in this amazing Betty Gordon film called Variety. And Betty was good friends with Renee Shafransky and Spalding Gray, Sarah Driver, and Sarah Driver was Jarmusch's partner. So all that Lower East Side, downtown '81 New York filmmaker scene, Jonathan just fit in like a glove. It didn't seem like he was just coming from the West Coast and back in America, back in New York with this provincial attitude of the Big Apple. Now, he just loved it. Like he was someone that would go to the Mud Club or CBGB's and try to scour the whole area and try to find musicians that would fill up the scenes in his movies. You see in The Last Embrace of all the musicians from Central Park, adding that suspense as Roy Scheider's being followed by Charles Napier, or in Something Wild, where you have all the lovely Florida-based musicians and church choirs singing as Jeff Daniels is spying on Ray Liotta and Melanie Griffith at the motel across the way. It just it really, and even Married to the Mob with, like, the Spoon Player, Jonathan found in Central Park, the doo-wop group, a cappella group. It just I think Jonathan really had a New York state of mind when it came to filmmaking, no matter where he was.
Just the reason I was thinking of Jarmusch was because after you mentioned him was you were mentioning earlier that Demme likes doing these no rehearsal 2 or 3 takes, and I was interviewing Jarmusch 2 or 3 weeks ago about his new film,
Oh, you
And
lucky so and so.
yeah, I can't help humble bragging my way, or not even so humble, just bragging.
Brag, baby, bag. I would do the
Yeah.
same.
He was saying that he said, I don't like doing more than one or two takes at most, and I don't rehearse. And he said for his new film, Kate Blanchett and Charlotte Rampling and Vicky
Tom
Creeps.
Waits. I can't wait for that. Yeah.
Yeah, they all wanted to. Well, because they're three separate stories, and so they're three sort of vignettes. And the Vicky Cripes and the three women wanted to do a rehearsal because they said we need to have a read through. And he said, "Oh yeah, knock yourself out, but I'm not coming. You do it. Make sure you know your lines or whatever what you feel comfortable doing. But when I'm going to turn up on set and do it then because that's when it needs doing." And it was, he was talking about, I want to keep it fresh. I want to get the accidents. I want to get everything on camera. I don't want to, I'm not a perfectionist. I don't have time. I don't have money, And so it was, and that was and I was just thinking, I wonder if that comes from a sort of cross pollination from someone like Demme.
You could make the case, because with Jarmusch, I mean, he's another amazing filmmaker, and one commonality that he and Jonathan shared was their sincere love and appreciation of classic film and filmmakers, and they both had a nice relationship with Sam Fuller, and Fuller was very influential with Jarmusch. I think he was cast in some of his movies. They were all in in the same cadre of respected filmmakers that worked with one another, like Wim Wenders or Aki Kaurismäki. But
Yes,
I think with
of course.
in the case of Jonathan, many people have noted that he has a Hitchcock approach to shooting close-ups. But even Demi mentioned in his commentary track for Caged Heat that the opening shots of Claudia Wilson trying to get some Juanita Brown trying to find her cigarettes and slapping Erica Gavin, that was inspired by Sam Fuller, particularly a film like Naked Kiss, the opening with Constance Towers beating up her pimp with a shoe. And
Right.
you see that again when Michelle Pfeiffer winds up her fist before knocking out Mercedes Rule during that chaotic honeymoon suite battle in Married to the Mob. I mean, so and also Fuller had the approach of just being like this dilettante that managed to work his way into the film industry based on his sheer experience and love of storytelling. I think that's something that Jarmusch attracted to as well, because he proclaimed in interviews that he's a self-professed dilettante. And as I mentioned before about Jonathan, where he said that conducting your education in public was through filmmaking. And it was just through those processes that I think really crystallized and evolved, you could say, this New York style of filmmaking. But if not for Jarmusch, then definitely Spike Lee and others that were coming out of the fray of the early '80s and that the whole downtown NYU scene.
It almost seems like the baton is passed on as well, because you mentioned Spalding Gray earlier, with makes a wonderful film, Swimming to Cambodia, and I went through a whole period in the late '80s, early '90s where I just read all of Spalding Gray's work, all of his dramatic monologues. They're just
he was such a character.
so good. Yeah, and Steven Soderbergh filmed Monster in the Box, and then went on to film a documentary about Spalding Gray's life.
Yeah, everything's gonna be fine. Yeah,
Exactly. And I just thought, what again? Soderbergh strikes me as somebody who's taken the baton from Jonathan Demme as being someone who has gone on to make a whole breadth of genre, but always with this sort of independent sensibility. And he can make, just as Jonathan can make Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia, big studio films, so Steven Soderbergh can make the Ocean's trilogy, and make the most glitzy, almost parodic sort of Hollywood film. So yeah, it feels like that stream of American independent cinema is ongoing.
absolutely. And I love how you mentioned the whole passing the baton, because I think, like as I mentioned before, Bertolucci and Fuller had a substantial impact on Demme's creative structure and style. But one other person that really deserves a huge shout out is Hal Ashby, as he was not only this I had the great pleasure of working with Amy Scott on her documentary on Hal Ashby back in 2018. And for a few years, I worked as an archival research assistant while I was in graduate school in Chicago. So that what I gathered in terms of the information, Jonathan's friendship with Hal, which didn't get into the documentary, I sort of stored that away, and it really sat with me when I was at the Sundance Film Festival, and the film that was showing before Hal was Phantom Thread, and just the dedication of Jonathan Demme at the end of Paul's movie really sat with me when I was on the plane back from Sundance, thinking to myself, I gotta bridge Demme and Ashby together somehow, but I don't know how yet. So it took a few years to really get an understanding of they'll stop making sense, pre-production, post-production, talking to Hal's girlfriend, Griffiths, who, Jonathan, who gave Jonathan this vest that Hal directed in as a gift after winning the Academy Award for Silence of the Lambs, because he thanked Hal in his Oscar speech. And it just, I think Hal in that feeling approach to making sure that the camera really got a moment or captured the authenticity in an obtrusive way, that was something that Jonathan really thrived on as a filmmaker. And you see those shots of, Mary Steenburgen with her phone calling walking through the kitchen in the small house, in the same way with Denzel Washington walking through the kitchen, through the door frame when he's talking to his wife and, having dinner with his baby. It's those, home movie moments I can best describe that I think really came from Hal Ashby, that came from the prospect of just letting the camera roll and just letting the moments really gestate over time. And this also from an editing perspective, when I talked to Craig McKay, he and Jonathan worked together in the same way Hal Ashby did with Norman Jewison, in terms of just making sure that there was that substantial needle drop and just the pacing. And if you look at the opening of Silence of the Lambs and Jodie Foster running through the track, I felt myself reminded of Bruce Dern running in the opening of Coming Home to the Rolling Stones at a time. I know it's totally two different movies. But when I talked to Craig McKay, I said to myself, did Hal influence you guys in terms of how you edited and shot your movies? Because it seemed like there was this kind of equation that they thrived on in terms of making sure that this intensity was there, but also the humanity.
Yeah, I mean, both Demme and Ashby, their movies, they're stories that exist in universes with with loads of different stories happening. There's a bit in Silence of the Lambs, which I rewatched recently with my daughter, who's a huge cinephile, and she suddenly admitted she'd never seen Silence of the Lambs. And we were watching season 3 of Hannibal. And I said, wait a minute, is this the first time you've ever seen this character? Because she hadn't seen Manhunter or Red Dragon or Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, really?
I was like, okay, we need to watch Silence. As much as I love Mads Mikkelsen, we need to watch Silence of the Lambs. So we rewatched it, and I just think I saw that in Liverpool on its release, and I just, I thought it was perfect.
Oh, awesome.
It's such a beautiful gothic film, but it's got so many. It was weird watching it today. It looks like a film that was made in the 70s, because there's this weird concertinaing of time as you get older. The 80s-ness just drops away, and so for instance, when Clarice Starling turns up at the first victim's house and goes to do the interview, there's a bit where the camera just wanders over the rails and just takes in almost a 360 of where this house is. And, somebody's hanging out washing, and so, a dog is in the garden jumping, and it's very frosty and cold. And I know there's an idea of a Hitchcock sort of from Frenzy of crimes can be going on in these houses and look, nobody's aware. But it also struck me as Hal Ashby of sort of being there or the last detail, that this story exists in the context of a world of other stories, of a universe of stories.
My sentiments exactly, John. I mean, even you think of Silence of the Lambs and just those shots where, before Jodie Foster meets Harry Northrop to talk about Frederica Bilmo's, room, or to go up to Frederica's room. You do have these establishing shots of second unit material of houses, of the river, really giving a full sense of just the environment and scope. That it makes you feel like this isn't just something fixed in dark rooms and basements, that this is outside the world. We're breathing in the environment. And the same way that in the opening montage in Philadelphia where you have that Bruce Springsteen song play, and you have all these kids, either jump roping or vendors waving hi to the camera. Jonathan is trying to pull you in, to the audience into this world in almost a pseudo documentary style fashion before going right into the narrative. And I think it's with that sense of unobtrusive style and focus that make his film so impactful, especially when it comes to actors not looking directly into the camera. I mean, when you see that scene of Tom Hanks being rejected by Denzel Washington after the first meeting they have together, when Andrew Beckett's fired from his law firm, and then it just holds on. You always think, I thought Tom Hanks was going to cry, and then he just looks up and then just looks sort of dazed for a second and then realizes, okay, I'm on my own. I'm going to keep moving. That's what I'm going to do. And for me, when I saw that when I was 14, I started crying like a baby. That was just, it really had that impact on me. I think that was just like the beauty of how Hal shot his films, and the same way Jonathan shot movies like Rachel Getting Married. Later on, like when you have that scene of Anne Hathaway talking to the AA group about why she feels so guilty after all those years, and not being able to forgive herself. And I think it was just that compassion and humanity that both Ashby and Demme saw in these characters. They really wanted to magnify for an audience.
Yeah, and I think those two films, Silence of the Lambs and Philadelphia, have I think they caught a lot of flack for problems that were more general in Hollywood. There are lots of homophobic renderings of villains and using homosexuality as a sort of trait, which adds to the villainousness of the baddie, of the othering of the homosexual. I don't think Silence of the Lambs does that. I don't think it's guilty of that. I think it's guilty of existing in the context of that, and therefore I understand where the anger comes from. But I don't think that. I think if that film came out today, it wouldn't actually have that many problems, because today we have a much broader queer cinema which is out there, and we have gay cinema which is not about coming out or the anguish of being gay, but it's just the character happens to be gay, or other, or comedies or whatever. And likewise for Philadelphia, you did have this idea of visibility. The relationship is not visible enough. Antonio Banderas and Tom Hanks are not. You wouldn't know they were necessarily gay unless the context of the film told you that, because there's nothing visible in terms of, affectionate. Physical affection or what have you, or sex scenes or what have you.
Right.
But again, I think that's because of the scarcity of that kind of representation at the time, which really isn't the individual film's fault.
Absolutely. It was the time. Robert F. Kennedy famously said to Norman Jewison when Jewison was concerned about whether or not he should shoot in the heat of the night, RFK said, timing is everything in politics, art, and life itself. And when it came to the making of this movie, Jonathan didn't, for the life of him, think that the world around him outside Silence of the Lambs would be as crazy and catastrophic as what he brought onto film. Because when the film came out on Valentine's Day 1991, it was a huge hit. And then by May of 1991, the world found out who Jeffrey Dahmer was. And then the murders and the whole aspect of a real live cannibal, some that would have been unfathomable years ago, has since resurfaced into the American zeitgeist in terms of criminal culture, of true crime obsession. And then I think someone at Entertainment Weekly wrote it was because of Jeffrey Dahmer that Silence of the Lambs still managed to gain momentum at the box office throughout all of 1991, up until when the video movies were released on video during Halloween and on HBO at the same time. So that mix of syndication, going back to what similar to how Soderbergh thrived in his career of multi-platform streaming or access. For Jonathan, the timing of having the HBO release the movie and of the videotape coming out before the Oscars was happenstance, was well timed. But in terms of reception they received from audiences, including those in America. Like they thought that he was celebrating violence, or even Gene Siskel thought that the film wasn't as palpable as, say, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, which I could definitely argue that Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, as profound and influential as it is as a film, it is more exploitational than Silence of the Lambs, whereas I think with Jonathan, he tried to give respect to the victims, tried to give respect to those who were kidnapped, who were faced or suffered the trauma of being imprisoned by another man against their own will. And, that scene where Jodie Foster's like reading on her recording tape, just going through the mortuary and seeing Frederica Bimmel's body, the sensitivity that Demme does in not showing all of nature, red tooth and claw, to borrow Tennyson's quote. He manages to truly show the reaction, become the emotive impact that solidifies what Clarice is feeling and how the audience reacts to it, and that the salaciousness of the crime is in the perspective of the audience more so than how Demme is showing the results. You see it enough in the photos and ephemera, but in terms of showcasing the results of the crime, Jonathan tried to be sensitive to it in the same way he was trying to be sensitive to capturing who Buffalo Bill was, because if you've seen the movie as much as I have over the years, Lecter states in his cell that Buffalo Bill is a garden variety manic depressive, and so the idea of even Jodie Foster reinforces that point. Clarice does, saying that transsexuals are very passive, really trying to solidify that point. In the same way, Jonathan's trying to solidify that we're not trying to other one person over another based on their sexual makeup. Is because of someone who was brought up in a world of systematic violence and abuse, as Lecter mentions to Clarice Starling, as indicated in the commentary track by Jonathan after the film came out on Criterion, that he really wanted to showcase how the elements of the inhumane aspects of society led to the evolution of serial killers. And I think with that, now it's since been recognized as a film of that merit, but it's unfortunately the message wasn't as palpable when people started protesting the film. And also on top of other films being released at the time, such as Basic Instinct by Paul Verhoeven, that were really toying with the notions of sexuality and violence. And at the time where, the early 90s would become this cluster of true crime, whether it be through Court TV or a pre-Natural Born Killers environment of so many acts happening on television at once. It's hard to get a sense of how sane the world is.
Yeah, it's weird as well, because I think in America you have there's always this responses. I remember I was talking to Caroline Young a week ago, and she was saying about Fatal Attraction, where people are shouting, "Kill the bitch," and here you had, "Kill the F word," at the end of Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
And I've never been in a cinema where somebody shouts out, "Kill the villain." It's just like that. In England, I've been to cinema in many different places, and never once sort of where people should, it's that to me is the equivalent of sort of pitchforks and stuff. It's a lynch mob mentality that I just don't. That's not the fault of the film. That's the fault of the audience. I'm sorry, you got to get a better audience. The film does not. The responsibility of the filmmaker it's not for some deranged person shouting at the screen. I also want to say, in terms of the humanity of Silence of the Lambs, I'd point to is it Brooke Smith's character,
yes,
the senator's daughter?
Oh yeah, Catherine Martin.
She is amazing. I don't want to hurt your dog, mister. That is, I mean, she's active. She's not passive. She tries her best in the most extraordinary circumstances to save herself. When Jodie Foster turns up, I always think this is hilarious. It's such a funny moment. And Jodie Foster says, "The other officers will be here soon. I'm just going out." And she's like, "You fucking bitch, don't leave me." It's just so human. Of course she would be like, "Where are you going? You've just discovered me. Now you're going somewhere else." Plus, Ted Levine's characterization is often overshadowed by Anthony Hopkins, because obviously Hopkins won the Oscar,
right?
But is an unbelievable piece of work. I find him creepy, and yet also there's a pathos to him, which is, that little side glance he gives when he's preparing himself for his home video, he's trying to tuck his sort of nether regions in. He sort of gives a side glance at the discomfort that he's feeling. And it's kind of heartbreaking, because you are, as horrible as his pathology is, it is a pathology. It's not something he's necessarily 100% in control of.
Right, and also you think of that scene where he's almost holding back tears when he has the bucket with trying to get the lotion in the basket from Catherine Martin.
Yeah.
And Jonathan deliberately has the camera zoom in on her dirt stained face to really emphasize that humanity that is trying to tap in Buffalo Bill, but just he keeps resisting it. It's just not part of his pathology, to the point where he just has to scream, "Put the lotion in the effing basket."
Yeah.
And I think also here with Levine, he's an amazing actor. He's someone that really he doesn't get much credit. I mean, you see him in a lot of Michael Mann's movies, where you see him in Ridley Scott's films once in a while. Or even I thought he gave a great performance, small, substantial role in Martin Scorsese's Shutter Island.
Amazing in Birth, Jonathan Glazer's Birth.
Yes, yes.
He's the boy's father.
Right. You would know the expertise on that.
Yes, and I'm just wedging it in there. He has this beautiful. He just has this great line where he's describing the plot of the film, basically saying he says he's her dead husband, and he just gives this and then says, "No, it's not funny." And it's like the ridiculousness of the whole premise of the film is in that line and that performance. It's in the line reading, So yeah, hats off to Ted Levine.
Yeah, amazing performance, and also very bold. I mean, it was unfortunate that he had to deal with the brunt of either be typecasted or being more or less redlined for that role that he played. But even as Jonathan mentioned in his Oscar speech, he really commended Ted for the bravery of playing that role, because initially when it came to casting the movie, as I talked to Brooke Smith, there were people coming in with props and trying to be totally out of their gourds, whereas Ted coming in with this very Midwestern calm approach, then switching right on to Buffalo Bill and then right back, really excited Jonathan the same way that when he saw Ray Liotta, read his audition for Max Fry and Melanie Griffith in Something Wild, that really scared the hell out of him. So I mean, it just the whole cast is incredible. Even Levine, I gotta mention, he gives another great supporting role in Jonathan's lesser known movie, The Truth About Charlie, which a lovely remake of Stanley Donen's Charade.
Yeah, well, that's a great way to segue, actually, because there is and you chronicle it in your book. There is a definite sort of falling off in fortunes for Jonathan when it comes to his post Philadelphia career. The Truth About Charlie being one of the films which is not well received and does not make a substantial amount of money at the box office. Ditto Beloved to some degree. Ditto, well, a few films until basically Rachel getting married.
Right. Well, I think we'll go back those post Philadelphia films, because I would say Clinica Aesthetico, Jonathan's production company, it really was very substantial that he create a production office where he could corral filmmakers that wanted to make the films that he wanted to make the films that they wanted to make, and not have to kowtow to the demands of the studio the way he did with Swing Shift with Warner Brothers, or the way he had to deal with Freddie Fields on Citizens Band in 1977. And also, I will say, Hal Ashby's love for trying to corral independent filmmakers together before he died played a part in how Jonathan shaped Clinica Aesthetico. I definitely will make that case. But when it came to there was some successes with That Thing You Do, Devil in a Blue Dress to some extent, and Ulysses Gold, films that he produced. But then when it came to Beloved, which would have been a great television film had the prospect been conceived for the screen, in the same way that David L. Whopper managed to have Alex Haley's roots become the substantial benchmark in American television in the late 70s. And for adapting Toni Morrison's intensely dense and harrowing novel, such as Beloved, which I read in high school, and trying to make into a nearly 3-hour film, it really is hard to really keep the audience stimulated for that long. And I think Jonathan, as much as he tried to do that and try to make this ghost story / historical reflection on America's unforgiving nature of slavery and his history with slavery, it just didn't sleep with the audiences that wanted to watch The Water Boy or whatever was coming out in theaters in the summer of fall of 1998. And same thing with Truth About Charlie, which in many ways, is similar to Luc Besson's films, the what was that Jason Statham film series from the early 2000s?
The Transporter.
The Transporter. Thank you. I felt like Truth About Charlie got gypped at the box office by films that almost had the same kind of visual style and structure as that film had. But I think also with Jonathan, he was toying with various different film styles from just a sincere love of all these other filmmakers that he was seeing at the Sundance Film Festival or at the Cannes Film Festival when he was one of the jurors in 2000. That really sparked interest in him trying to corral aspects of One Car Wise in The Mood for Love, with Run Lola Run, with still the three-pronged structure of sex, violence, and social commentary driving The Truth About Charlie into the direction that it had. Granted, a very labyrinthian style, but I think Jonathan tried to do as much as he could to deviate from remaking Charade shot for shot in the same way that he tried to deviate from remaking The Manchurian Candidate shot for shot. There are nods to both those movies, but in the most original styles and approaches Jonathan managed to film. But for audience at the time, whether it be for The Truth About Charlie or even for Manchurian Candidate, it was a different audience. For early 2004, the most popular films were Team America: World Police, The Passion of the Christ, Fahrenheit 9/11, very incendiary movies that really toyed with the politics of the left and right at the time during Bush's re-election campaign. And I think Jonathan, as much as he tried to really inject his view and his focus through remaking The Manchurian Candidate, it didn't leave as much of an impact as he wanted it to make as the result of, say, Bush's re-election and also the immediacy of Paramount trying to push the film, that it made Jonathan almost want to walk away from Hollywood in general.
Yeah, I mean, part of that rejection of Hollywood, or part of that sort of trying to, in some way, recover from some of those disappointments, was him concentrating more and more on documentary filmmaking as well.
Absolutely. I think for him, he classified documentary filmmaking or even filming performances as like a cleansing shower or a bath, right, in that he was dealing with the artifice and budgets of a studio and shooting schedules, whereas with capturing a moment on stage while it's in real time was something that he found real joy over, because he didn't have to rethink over how many times he had to shoot one section of the stage versus another section. I think after the experiences he had with Stop Making Sense, it really emboldened him to feel more comfortable in taking the chances and creative liberties in filming musicians like Robin Hitchcock or Neil Young in the case of Heart of Gold, which I think really was a pivot point for Jonathan, because for Neil Young, in his personal life, he almost had a near-death experience, which I remember reading Rolling Stone and just following the coverage and buying Prairie Wind, which would have been his last album, worried that, one of the great songwriters of the last half century was about to no longer be with us. But then he survived his brain aneurysm surgery and made this incredible, put on this incredible concert. And it couldn't have been done by any other filmmaker other than Jonathan, because I think for Jonathan, that sense of Neil's humanity through his music, that sense of understanding, the mortality of life, as well as the fleetlessness of experiences, that really caused him to go back behind the camera and make Heart of Gold, and then from there keep having the camera roll when he was down in New Orleans to cover post-Katrina New Orleans in the lower Ninth Ward, and meeting people like Pastor Mel and eventually Carolyn Parker, as well as Native American tribes down in Louisiana that would become later part of a growing obsession and fascination that would stem in his documentaries later in life, as well as to his son's work, Brooklyn, who's an activist filmmaker in his own right.
Which was, centered around the protests against the pipeline that was going through the tribe's lands, right?
It happened in 2016, but before that, and I didn't put this in the book. I wish I had in hindsight, but Jonathan came across, he and his son managed to film like these Native American rituals in New Orleans. And it really, once again, stimulated Jonathan's interest in these various cultures in the same way when he went down to Haiti first to collect art and then bring his cameras to capture the Aristide elections in Haiti Dreams of Democracy in 1987, that it was just that sincere passion and humanity of seeing people thrive in very difficult circumstances, and how elements of spirituality, storytelling, and music really try to really eclipse the dour environment that New Orleans, if not the entire Southeast, went through after 2005. I mean, I had relatives who lived in Slidell. My grandparents lived not far from where the hurricanes hit. So seeing those documentaries and seeing the humanity coming out of what Jonathan shot really reminded me of just how much when I went to New Orleans, just seeing people trying to survive and thrive after the devastation, it was very, very sobering. And also, I think for Jonathan, very humbling that Hollywood doesn't have to measure the success of a filmmaker. It can be done just by grabbing a camera and just going out there without having to prove yourself. And Jonathan didn't have to do that. He just shoot it just to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it always felt like with his films, as with his actors, as with his projects in terms of being an activist, he was never somebody, he was sticky as an individual. He stuck to things. People stuck to him. And so as he rolls on in his career, the actors who he works with, Ted Levine, Charles Napier, you've already mentioned, they appear again and again and again, and so it is with also the causes and the places that he becomes interested in. He doesn't go there for one particular thing and then leave. He goes there, and that's going to be a continuing relationship that he has for the rest of his life.
Absolutely. And I think also the same thing goes for the projects that he tried to make but didn't get a chance to film. Whether it be this treatment that he had back in the late 70s that his wife Evelyn Purcell, and Hercules Belleville, Jonathan Glazer's producer, and who also worked with Polanski and Bertolucci, they wrote a treatment for Herman Melville's Typee, his first book all about going AWOL on the San Marquis Island. And the treatment read like the early Corman movies that Jonathan produced with Joe Viola, like particularly the Hot Box.
Wow.
I found like there's some sort of element that like I found from the American Heritage Society, the American Heritage Center, and it was very surprising, like why Melville sort of pulled at Jonathan. And then when I read his father's reportage, and he alluded to being called Ishmael and what have you, it felt like, okay, Melville was probably read around the Demme house as when Jonathan was a kid, but it never got to full green light status. And the same thing like with Z-Tune, which would have been an amazing animated film based on David Edgar's reportage of this man who by canoe managed to save various neighbors during Hurricane Katrina.
Yes, the David Eggers novel. I remember reading that soon after it came out. And I read Typee quite recently. I was catching up on some Melville, going through my Library of America collection. And Typee is basically the first 10 minutes of The Thin Red Line.
Pretty much.
It's just like people from a shipwreck suddenly realizing that there's another way of life on this island, and maybe the guys that they've been calling savages are actually got the right idea.
Yeah, and I think maybe that was an element that Jonathan was attracted to in the first place. But in terms of the studios trying to back a film about white explorers settling upon native land, and this is before Dances with Wolves and what have you, and the deluge of other films of that nature. And I don't think it really would have been a major sell. But for Jonathan, it was one of the many pet projects that he loved, or books that he would have loved to adapt. Same thing with Russell Banks' Continental Drift, which would have hit close to home to the Haitian refugee situation. And yeah, unfortunately, that never got made. And additionally, Jonathan also was fascinated with covering the life of Martin Luther King in the early 1990s. But yeah, I mean, that was a major project that took many directors to try to capture and still capture to this day. I mean, there was a great HBO film called Boycott with Jeffrey Wright in the early 2000s, who initially was going to be in Truth About Charlie before Tim Robbins was hired. Spassky, because Wright was working with Will Smith, who also was going to be in the Truth About Charlie. They both were scheduled to be in Michael Mann's Ali. So, but
Right.
yeah, just the deluge of so many unmade projects, it really piqued my interest of how much juice, or as Jeff Bridges said about Hal Ashby, how much pudding came out of this guy's oven. And that's the best way I can describe Jonathan. He was like a walking bottle of honey with legs. That's the best way to describe it. And just like all these creative flies just sort of gathering, attracting to him. And he's just, just walking along and just embracing just that gestation that Chris Zia said at this event a few years ago that Jonathan, when he always loved hearing ideas, he called it fertilizing the air. I think that really just says a lot about his movies and what they offer and what they still offer. Even his most mixed films, like even like Ricky and the Flash, there's a lot there that you can just love and soak up. I mean, for me, I've seen Black Orpheus, and I feel like that movie, Ricky and the Flash, is Jonathan's Black Orpheus. In just particularly the ending and just having Meryl Streep singing that amazing Canned Heat song, "Let's Work Together." That's pretty much what Jonathan's telling the audience, telling the world, let's work together.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
in this time right now, like where things are very cataclysmic and divisive, and people are walking on eggshells, myself included. I think there was so much catharsis I found in chronicling and researching Jonathan's life that it made the experience of enjoying life all the more lovable and redeemable. That's just to see how he operated and how he worked. It really put a kick in my step, realizing that there is something to be said about building connections and establishing strong friendships and not burning bridges. That's not always the case with people in the film industry, give or take. But when it comes to someone like Jonathan, like he abided by this one Haitian proverb that I use to this day whenever I feel like there's a lot going on in the world. Little by little, the bird builds its nest.
Yeah.
And I feel like that just Jonathan operated on that credo, and that's something I try to operate on in this day and age, and also as a writer.
I love that. I love it. That popped out of the book, and that also felt like an overarching theme of the book. I felt like the nest was being built in front of me. By the time I got to that phrase, it was like, yes, yes, yes. That's that's what I've witnessed, through your work and through Jonathan's as well. Let me wrap up today's conversation, which honestly we could talk for another 2 or 3 hours. I'm absolutely sure, and hopefully,
Oh, absolutely.
hopefully this conversation will continue in other forms. But let me ask you for a recommended film book for our listeners.
Oh, recommended film book. Man, there's so many. One book I read recently that just I found really moving was Matthew Spector's book, The Golden Hour, which I thought was a lovely. It almost reads like a Philip Roth novel, but it's not. It's the autobiographical structure of Spector's life, as well as his father, who worked with within MCA and Lou Wasserman's environment, and also just this very loving ode to Hollywood from the '60s into the early 2000s, as well as the establishment of relationships between friends, family, loved ones. I thought it was incredibly moving, and I would love to write a book or chronicle uh, family members of that same kind of background in the film industry with that same kind of loving reverence that Matthew wrote in his book. So if you get a chance to, if you want to read like a loving book about families and film all together, The Golden Hour by Matthew Spector, I definitely recommend that.
Excellent. That reminds me so much of a former guest on this podcast, George Stevens Jr., and his memoir
Oh yeah.
about his father and about his own career, which it stretches from him being a child with Stan Laurel living down the road to to meeting President Obama as chairman of the AFI, founder of the AFI. So it's a genial kind of as you say, loving presence. So I haven't read that book, so that's one that's going straight on the to read list.
Yeah, and the second one also I have is Mike Nichols' A Life by Mark Harris, because that was the inspirational text that I focused on when I was writing my book on Jonathan. Granted, I interviewed only 40 people for this book, and my book is about a third the size of Mark's book on Mike Nichols. But the whole compassion and love that he brought to so many actors and other people in the creative world really stuck with me, that I wanted to bring that same kind of energy and focus to chronicling Jonathan's life and making sure he had his day in the sun.
Yeah, that's a wonderful recommendation. I love Mark Harris's work generally, and that book in particular. And
Absolutely.
We had a conversation, so any listeners who are interested can also go into the archives and dig that one up for once they've read the book themselves. Well, listen, David, I've absolutely loved talking to you. Loved reading the book. I am the intended audience for this book. But if anybody's out there who doesn't know Jonathan Demme's work so well, I think this is a marvelous introduction as well. And I hope that it will, as I'm sure it will, encourage people to sort of to maintain and to project into the future Jonathan Demme's reputation.
Well, thank you very much, John. I really appreciate your love of the book, and I loved writing it, and hope we get a chance to talk again. And yeah, I just I'm stoked that people are enjoying Jonathan's movies for a second time around.
In the Building, Season 5.
The hit Hulu original is back.
The night Buster died, he was talking with this mobster.
Was he killed in a hit? We need to go face to face with the mob.
Get ready for a season.
Buongiorno, signore.
Oh, this is how I die.
You can't refuse.
You're gonna save the day, like you always do, by being smart, sharp, and almost always by mistake.
The Hulu original series, Only Murders in the Building, premieres September 9th. Streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney Plus for bundle subscribers. Terms apply. New episodes Tuesdays.